nobody stopped her. That is the part that will bother you most. She walked into that sitting room with the full confidence of a woman who has never been checked in her life. Looked at the maid who had been standing in that house longer than she had been invited into it and said, "Clean that up," like she was speaking to the floor itself. And the boss, the man whose name alone made people in 3 countries lower their voices, stood at the door and watched it happen and said nothing. The maid looked at him for exactly 1 second. He did not move. So she turned back to the woman in front of her and she said, with the quietest, most devastating composure you have ever heard in your life, "I think you should clean it up yourself, since your hands appear to be working perfectly fine." The room stopped breathing, and the boss, for the first time in a very long time, felt something move in his chest that he had not planned for. Because what he just watched was not a maid defending herself. It was a woman he had already decided everything about, showing him that his decision was correct. Stay with me. This one is going to be worth every second. Her name was Amara Osei, and she had not arrived at the Park estate by accident. 3 years before any of this happened, she had been running the housekeeping operation of one of the most expensive private residences in the city, not as staff in the traditional sense, as the person who made sure everything that needed to work worked. The person who understood that a house of that size and that significance was not simply a building people lived in, it was a system. And systems required someone who understood them completely, who respected the details, who treated every room as though the person who owned it was always about to walk through the door. She had left that position on her own terms after 3 years. Her employer had relocated. She had been offered the chance to follow. She had declined. Not because the money wasn't right, because the work had become too small for what she was capable of, and she had always known the difference. She had taken 2 months between positions, not to rest, but to be selective. She had 4 offers before she accepted the Park estate. She chose it not because it paid the most, though it did. She chose it because when she walked through the front door for the first time during her interview, the house had a particular quality of order to it that told her the man who owned it understood what a well-run home actually meant, that he was someone who noticed when things were done properly, someone worth working for. Park Jae-won had interviewed her himself, not through an assistant, not through his household manager, himself. He had sat across from her at the long table in the formal dining room and asked her 3 questions that had nothing to do with her experience or her references. He had asked her what she did when she noticed something wrong that nobody else had noticed yet. She had said, "I fix it before it becomes a problem, and then I make sure it cannot happen the same way again." He had asked her what she did when someone in the house disrespected her. She had looked at him with the full steadiness of someone who had thought about this question before anyone ever asked it. "I make clear, once, calmly, what I will and will not accept, and then I let my decision speak for itself." He had asked her, last, why she thought a house like this one needed someone like her. She had looked around the room slowly, taken her time. Then she had looked back at him. "Because excellence does not maintain itself," she said. "Someone has to care enough to protect it every single day, and most people stop caring the moment nobody is watching." He had said nothing for a long moment. Then he had told her she could start Monday. That had been 3 years ago. In 3 years, Amara had learned the Park estate the way she learned everything, completely. The precise temperature the main hallway needed to be kept at in winter so that the antique wood panels didn't contract. The exact order in which the formal rooms needed to be prepared before guests arrived so that the house felt alive rather than staged. The particular way Park Jae-won took his morning tea, which nobody had told her and she had never asked about because she had simply paid attention until she knew. She had also, without planning to and without naming it, learned him. not in the way people learn a person they are close to, in the way a perceptive woman learns a man she is around consistently when both of them are being entirely themselves rather than performing for anyone. She had learned that he was quieter than people expected him to be, given what he was, that he carried his authority without displaying it, which was more dangerous than the men who displayed it constantly, that he ate alone most evenings and did not appear to find it lonely, but occasionally looked at the empty chair across from him for a moment longer than practical before returning to whatever was in front of him. She had learned that he noticed her work, not in the way employers notice work when something goes wrong, in the way someone notices work they genuinely respect. He had said it to her directly once after a dinner she had organized for 12 of his associates when everyone had gone and she was resetting the room. "You run this house like it matters," he had said from the doorway. She had looked up. "It does matter," she had said simply, and gone back to work. He had stood there a moment longer than necessary. Then he had left, and neither of them had mentioned it again. But something in the space between them had shifted quietly that evening forward, the way things shift when two people have said something true to each other without planning to. That was the house Min-ji arrived into. Her full name was Choi Min-ji, and she came from Seoul with 2 large cases, a direct manner, and the particular composure of a woman who had been raised to understand that her family's name carried weight in certain rooms. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with Park Jae-won's mother beside her, which was not a small detail. His mother had not visited the estate in 8 months. The fact that she had come now, and that she had brought someone with her, communicated everything that needed to be communicated, without a single word being spoken about it. Jae-won had greeted his mother at the door with the particular warmth of a man who loves someone he also finds complicated. He had held his hands, spoken to her in Korean, listened when she spoke. Then he had looked at Min-ji beside her with an expression that gave away nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Min-ji had extended her hand. He had taken it, briefly, correctly. "It is good to finally meet you in person," she had said. "Your mother speaks of this house constantly." "I imagine she does," he had said pleasantly, and shown them both inside. Amara had been in the upper hallway when they arrived, finishing the preparation of the guest rooms. She had heard the door, heard the voices, and continued working, because that was what she did. She became aware of Min-ji the way she became aware of most things in that house, not through introduction, through attention. She heard the cadence of her voice in the rooms below, heard the way she moved through the house with the particular ease of someone who was mentally measuring it for herself. And she understood the way she understood most things that mattered in that house before anyone had explained to her. The first 3 days were surface level. Min-ji was gracious at meals. She asked Amara questions about the house with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. She commented warmly on how well everything was maintained. She positioned herself at every turn as someone who was simply happy to be there and learning, which was the most effective possible way to establish herself in a house she intended to change. Amara watched. She did not form opinions early. She formed them accurately. On the 4th day, Min-ji came to find her in the east corridor, where she was polishing the cabinet handles, a detail most people in the house had never noticed needed doing, and that she did every 2 weeks without being asked. "You work very hard," Min-ji said, leaning against the wall. "Is it not exhausting, doing all of this every day?" "I find it satisfying," Amara said, without stopping. Min-ji watched her for a moment. "You have been here 3 years." "I have." "And before that?" Amara told her, the previous estate, the work, the standard she held herself to. Min-ji nodded slowly. "So you have given a lot of your life to other people's houses." Amara stopped, turned to look at her. She took a moment before answering, the kind of moment that lets a person know they have said something worth examining. "I have built something I am proud of in every house I have worked in. That is not giving something away. That is a choice." Min-ji smiled. "Of course," she said warmly. "I only meant that you deserve to be recognized for it." She pushed off the wall and walked away. Amara watched her go. Then she turned back to the cabinet handles and finished what she was doing. But her understanding of Min-ji was now complete. Because a woman who opens with a compliment that functions as a reduction is not a woman who has run out of strategy. She is a woman who has just started using it. The first real move came 6 days after Minji arrived. There was a lunch. 3 of Jaewon's business associates, men who came to the estate occasionally and who understood, without it being stated, the kind of house they were in and the kind of man who owned it. Amara had prepared everything. The table was set with the particular precision she brought to formal occasions, every detail considered, every element in its right place. She was bringing the final serving dish through when Minji appeared from the sitting room and smoothly took it from her hands. "Let me help," she said sweetly. "You have done so much already." Before Amara could respond, Minji had carried the dish to the table herself, set it down with a small, graceful gesture, and turned to the guests with a warm smile. "I hope you enjoy it. I wanted to make sure everything was just right." One of the associates looked up with genuine appreciation. "You prepared all of this?" Minji tilted her head modestly. "I did what I could." Amara stood at the edge of the room. Every dish on that table had come from her hands. She had been in that kitchen since 6 in the morning. Minji had not entered it once. She looked at Jaewon across the table. He was already looking at her. His expression did not change, but his eyes said, "I see it. Every single thing that is happening right now, I see it." She gave him the smallest nod. "Not here, not in front of these men." She went back to the kitchen, stood at her counter in the quiet of it, and made her decision about what the next move would need to look like. That evening, after the guests had gone and the house had settled into its particular nighttime quiet, Jaewon came to the kitchen. He did this sometimes, not often, and always late when the house was empty of everyone but the two of them. He would come and stand at the counter the way he stood at the counter, with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the forearm, like a man who was still carrying the day but had put down the formal version of it. He stood there for a moment, just looked at her. "That was wrong," he said. "Yes," she said simply. "I should have said something at the table." "You couldn't," Amara said. She kept working. "Not in front of those men. It would have made everything worse." She looked up at him. "But you need to say something now, tonight, to her directly." He held her gaze. There was a quality to the way this man looked at her that had always been different from the way he looked at everything else in his house. Everything else he looked at with assessment. Her he looked at with something that had no professional word for it, and both of them had spent a long time not giving it one. "Tonight," he said, not a question, a commitment. She nodded once, went back to work. He stayed at the counter a moment longer than he needed to. Then he left. And what happened next was not what Minji had planned for. Jaewon found Minji in the sitting room. She was arranged on the sofa with the particular ease of a woman who had decided the furniture already belonged to her. A book open in her lap that she was not reading, a cup of tea on the table beside her that had gone cold. She looked up when he entered with a warm, practiced smile that she had been using since she arrived, the one that had been calibrated to communicate softness and belonging simultaneously. He sat across from her, did not lean back, did not reach for anything, just sat with the particular stillness of a man who had already completed every thought he needed to complete before entering the room. "I need to speak to you about what happened at lunch today," he said. Minji tilted her head gently. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "Everything on that table today was prepared by Amara. She was in that kitchen from early morning. You did not enter it once." A small pause. Minji's smile did not disappear. It adjusted, the way a skilled person's expression adjusts when a conversation has moved somewhere they did not expect, but they are experienced enough not to show the surprise fully. "I only wanted to help," she said. "I thought it would be nice for the guests to feel that the household was welcoming them together as a unit."
Jae-won looked at her. You took credit for work that was not yours, in front of men who matter to this family, and the person whose work it was stood at the edge of that room and said nothing because she understood the situation better than you gave her credit for. Minji set her book down. Something shifted underneath her composure. Not anger, recalibration. The quiet recalibration of a woman who has just understood that the man across from her is not going to be managed the way she had planned to manage him. Jae-won, she said carefully, I think perhaps you are more attached to your staff than is usual, which I understand. 3 years is a long time, but there are certain things that a house like this one requires, a certain kind of woman at its center. Someone who understands your world, your family, what your mother wants for you. He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet that people who knew him understood was not emptiness, it was precision. He was choosing exactly what he was going to say, and he was going to say only that. My mother's wishes for me are something I hold with complete respect, he said, and they are mine to consider, not yours to use. Minji said nothing. What I am telling you clearly, he continued, is that this house runs the way it runs because of the people in it who make it what it is, and I will not have that disrespected. Not at my table, not in my rooms, not in any corner of this estate. He looked at her without looking away. That will not happen again. He stood. The meeting was over. He had not raised his voice once. Minji sat in the sitting room after he left and understood for the first time since she had arrived that she had miscalculated something significant. She had read the house correctly. She had read his mother correctly. She had not read him correctly at all. And the question now was not how to win something she had thought was already hers. The question was how much she had already lost without knowing it. She decided to go directly to the source. The next morning, she came to find Amara.
Amara was in the garden room, reorganizing the linen storage, a task she did at the start of every month with the systematic thoroughness she brought to everything that kept the house running at the level it ran at. She heard Minji come in, did not stop working. I wanted to apologize, Minji said, for yesterday at the lunch. Amara folded a linen, set it in its place, reached for the next one. I should not have taken the dish from you, Minji continued. It was impulsive. I only wanted to contribute. Amara turned around. She gave Minji her full attention the way she gave everything her full attention, unhurried, direct, like she was deciding exactly how much of the truth the moment required. Minji, she said calmly, you planned that before you left the sitting room. You waited until the timing was right, and you took the dish because you wanted those men to see you in a particular way in that house. She paused. I am not angry about it. I simply want you to know that I see clearly. I always have. Minji held her gaze. Something moved in her expression that was more honest than anything she had shown since she arrived. Almost respect. The reluctant recognition of a woman who has just encountered someone she underestimated and is recalibrating in real time. You are very direct, she said. I find it saves time, Amara said, and went back to the linens. Minji stood there for a moment. Then she said it, the thing underneath everything else she had been saying since she arrived. Quiet, almost gentle, almost kind, which made it more dangerous than if she had shouted it. He will never choose you, she said. You understand that, don't you? A man like him, with a family like his, with a mother like his, it does not matter what is in that kitchen at night. It does not matter how he looks at you. The world he lives in has a shape, and you do not fit it. The garden room was very still. Amara stopped working. She set down what was in her hands, she turned around slowly, and she looked at Minji with an expression that was not hurt,
not anger, not defensiveness, just the absolute composed clarity of a woman who has never once needed someone else's assessment of her life to know what her life was worth. She took her time before she spoke, let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to sit. "I have never," she said quietly, "spent a single day of my life trying to fit a shape someone else drew for me." She held Minji's gaze without blinking, "and I am not going to begin because you have drawn one." She picked up what she had set down, went back to work. Her hands were completely steady. Minji left the garden room without another word, but she did not leave the fight. 2 days later, Jaewon's mother came to find Amara. Madam Park was a woman who had spent 50 years in a world that required absolute control of every surface, and she had mastered that control so completely that it had become indistinguishable from her personality. She sat down at the kitchen table with the authority of a woman who considered every room she entered an extension of her jurisdiction, and looked at Amara the way she looked at everything she was in the process of making a decision about. "You run a very good house," she said. Amara said, "Thank you, Madam Park," and continued what she was doing. "My son values order. He always has, even as a boy." She paused. "A house like this one, a man like him, it requires a particular kind of stability. You understand what I mean." Amara set down what she was holding, turned to her fully. "Yes," she said, "I understand exactly what you mean." Madam Park studied her. "You are not going to make this easy for me." "I am going to be honest with you," Amara said, "which I believe you prefer to easy." Something moved in the older woman's face, not quite surprise, the recognition of someone who has just been read accurately by a person they did not expect to be read by. "Minji is a good match," Madam Park said, "for his world, for this family." "Minji," Amara said, without sharpness, "came into this house and took credit for my work in front of his associates. She told me in this kitchen that I do not fit the shape of his life, and she has spent 2 weeks trying to make herself at home in a house she was invited into as a guest." She looked at Madam Park directly. "With respect, those are not the qualities of a woman who would be good for him. They are the qualities of a woman who wants what he represents." The kitchen was completely silent. Madam Park sat with her hands flat on the table. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that Amara went back to her work, because she had said what needed to be said, and she was not in the habit of performing her convictions for an audience after she had expressed them. "You love him," Madam Park said finally. Amara was still for a moment. Then she continued working. "That," she said quietly, "is not a conversation I am prepared to have with you. It is a conversation that belongs somewhere else entirely." Madam Park looked at her for a long moment, then she stood, straightened her jacket, and said one thing before she left the kitchen. "You are not what I came here expecting to find." Amara looked up. "No," she said, "I imagine I am not." Madam Park left, and for the first time since she had arrived with Minji beside her, she walked through that house, looking at it differently, looking at what was actually there rather than what she had come prepared to see. The evening it all came apart happened quietly, the way the most significant things always happen, not with announcement, with inevitability. There was a dinner, just the household, Jaewon, his mother, Minji, and the 2 senior members of his staff, who occasionally joined for evening meals on the nights the house had that particular relaxed quality to it. Amara had cooked. She brought the food through and set it with the care she brought to every table in that house, whether it was a formal occasion with 12 guests or a quiet evening with 5. One of the senior staff, a man named Kwon,
who had been with Jaewon for 11 years and who did not offer compliments the way people offer small talk, looked up after the first course and said simply, "This is extraordinary." Before Amara could acknowledge it, Min-ji said, "I suggested the seasoning." She smiled graciously. "I have been learning so much from watching." The table received it warmly, small nods, pleasant murmurs. Amara stood at the edge of the table. She looked at him. He was already looking at her, and this time his expression was different from the last time this had happened. Last time it had said, "I see it." This time it said, "Enough." He set down his fork. The table noticed immediately because Park Jae-won setting down his fork mid-meal was not something that happened. "Amara prepared everything on this table," he said, "every single element of it, from early this morning." He looked around the table without raising his voice. "When she is in this house, the standard of everything you eat and everything you experience is entirely her work." He looked at Min-ji. "That will be acknowledged correctly every time." The table was silent. Min-ji's face was perfectly composed, but her hands in her lap were not. Amara looked at him for one moment. Then she nodded once quietly and went back to the kitchen. She stood at her counter in the still of it and felt something she had been managing carefully for 3 years rise to the surface and refuse to be managed any further. Not emotion exactly, certainty. The particular certainty of a moment that has finally caught up with the decision that preceded it. She heard the kitchen door. She did not turn around. She knew his footstep by now, the way she knew every sound this house made.
He came and stood beside her at the counter, close. The particular closeness that had been building for 3 years through every late evening and every quiet exchange and every look across every room they had ever shared. She kept her eyes on what was in front of her. "I should have done that the first time," he said. "Yes," she said, "you should have." A silence between them that was not uncomfortable, that had never been uncomfortable, that had always been, underneath everything else, the most honest communication either of them had managed. "Amara," he said. She looked up at him, the direct, steady gaze that had stopped him in his tracks the first time he had ever looked at her properly, and had not entirely released him since. "I have been trying to find the right moment for something," he said, "and I have recently understood that I have been waiting for a right moment that was never going to arrive on its own." He looked at her with the certainty of a man who makes decisions completely and does not revisit them. "I do not want you in this house as my maid." She was quiet. She held his gaze. "Then what do you want?" she said. He looked at her, unhurried, certain. "Everything else," he said, "if you will allow me to try." She was still for a long moment. The kitchen was completely quiet around them. Then she turned back to the counter, reached for a spoon, tasted what was on the stove, considered it carefully, set the spoon down. "You should know," she said, "that I am not a simple woman." "I know that," he said. "I do not compromise on what matters to me, not for a household, not for a family, not for anyone's idea of what shape my life should take. I would not ask you to," he said. She looked at him. "And I will never," she said quietly, and finally, "be anyone's maid in the way that woman meant it when she said it. Not in this house, not in any house, not for a single day of whatever comes next." He looked at her with the full steadiness of a man who has never once asked a woman to be less than she was. "You are," he said, "the most capable and the most certain person I have ever had the privilege of watching work." He paused, "and I have been watching for 3 years." She held his gaze. Something moved in her expression, slow, real, entirely hers. "Good answer," she said, And for the first time in 3 years, in the quiet of that kitchen, she smiled at him without measuring it first. In the sitting room, Madame Park sat with her tea. She had heard nothing specific. She had heard everything that mattered. The quality of the silence coming from that kitchen, the way it had settled, the way it held. Min-ji came downstairs an hour later with her bags already organized by the door. She had not been dramatic about it. She was too self-possessed for drama. She found Madame Park in the sitting room and sat across from her with the quiet dignity of a woman who has read a room correctly, even if it was too late to change what the room had already decided.
"I think I will go home in the morning," she said. Madame Park looked at her. Something in her face that was not cold, but was honest. "I think that is right," she said gently. Min-ji nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the truest thing she had said since she arrived. "He never looked at me the way he looks at her. Not once, not even at the beginning." Madame Park said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would improve on the truth of it. Min-ji left the next morning. The house felt different before she had even reached the gate. The particular difference of a tension that had been present so long it had started to feel like atmosphere, lifting all at once. Madame Park came to the kitchen that afternoon. She sat at the table. Amara was working. She did not stop. The older woman watched her for a long time, watched the efficiency of it, the care underneath the efficiency, the way she moved through that kitchen like every single thing she did in it mattered to her, because it did, because that was simply who she was. "My son stopped eating properly after his father died," Madame Park said finally. "For almost 2 years. Food became something he endured." She paused. "The first dinner I attended here where he ate the way he used to, slowly, with actual attention, was 8 months after you arrived." Amara stopped. She turned to look at her. "I did not know that," she said softly. "No," Madame Park said, "you wouldn't." She looked at her hands on the table. "I came here to protect him. I went about it badly." Amara looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, you did." No softening, no cushion placed carefully around the truth, just the truth, offered directly, the way she offered everything. Madame Park looked up at her, and for the first time since she had arrived at that estate, something in the older woman's face released, the long, slow release of a person setting down a weight they had been carrying in the wrong direction. "She is not what I came here expecting to find," she said, almost to herself. Amara almost smiled. "So I have been told," she said, and Madame Park, for the first time, smiled back, small, real, the kind of smile that cannot be performed because it arrives before the decision to show it.
That evening was the first dinner since Min-ji had left that felt like what dinners in that house were supposed to feel like. Madame Park ate slowly, with attention. She set her fork down after the second course and looked toward the kitchen for a long moment. Then she looked at her son. "Tell her," she said quietly, "that this is the finest meal I have eaten in this house." Jae-won looked at his mother. Something settled in his face. The particular settling of a man who has held a position through difficulty and can finally feel the ground underneath it becoming solid. He got up, went to the kitchen, found Amara in the middle of something, because she was always in the middle of something, focused and entirely present. He leaned against the counter. "My mother says this is the finest meal she has eaten in this house." Amara looked up. Something moved across her face. First surprise, then, underneath the surprise, something warmer and quieter that she did not try to hide. "She said that exactly?" she asked. He nodded. She looked back down at what she was doing, but the corner of her mouth moved. He watched her for a moment. Then he pushed off the counter and came to stand beside her, close. The same closeness as the night before. The closeness that had stopped being accidental a long time ago. She did not move away. They stood together in the quiet of that kitchen. The house settled around them. And in the sitting room, Madame Park sat with her tea and listened to the particular quality of the silence coming from her son's kitchen. And she let it be what it was. She picked up her cup, drank slowly, and for the first time since she had arrived, she was not trying to change anything. Because some things, she was finally willing to admit, had already been decided long before she got there. And the woman her son had chosen had never, not for a single second, needed anyone's permission to be exactly who she was. That was the whole story. That was always going to be the whole story. If you made it this far, you already know that Amara Osei did not come to that house to be reduced. She came to do what she does best, and she left every single person in it better than they were before they understood who they were dealing with. Like this video, if you believe the right woman never has to fight for her worth, she simply has to refuse to pretend it isn't there. And subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and you do not want to miss it.